What is up everyone, the Evolution Cup is starting later today, so in this video we'll be checking out the meta and some top teams to get you ready for it. In the Evolution Cup, only Pokemon that have already evolved once and can evolve again will be allowed, and that creates a format where Pokemon such as Vigoroth, Zweilous, Hakamo, Dragonair, Golbat and Dusclops can really shine. I'd say the 6 I just mentioned are the absolute top meta. Combine any 3 of these 6 together and you've already got a solid team. But there's definitely more possible as well. But the list is not that big. I'd say up until around like rank 30 on PvPoke, it's like viable-ish. But once you start getting past that, it's gonna be hard to run some of these Pokemon. There's definitely some exceptions. I think Magneton is very good, for example. Some of the grasses could be quite useful. We got, where is it, Brionne as a Charmer could be interesting because there will be a lot of dragons, but go further than that and it's gonna be quite difficult. In general, you're gonna want to stick within the top 30, and even in here there's some Pokemon I'd say maybe don't run them. For example, you might have noticed I skipped over Machoke earlier. And that's for a good reason. I don't think it's very good. I think it will be decent. It's going to be some decent anti-meta to take care of like Vigoroths and Zweilous, which will be everywhere. Besides that, it has like neutral matchups versus most of the dragons. But the problem is, it only runs fighting moves. It has Cross Chop, and Dynamic Punch. No coverage moves at all, which means it's going to get hard walled by Pokemon like Golbat, Dusclops, Haunter, Nidorina, which will be everywhere. So that's why I don't recommend you spend an elite TM to get Cross Chop on Machoke, because in general I don't believe it's gonna be worth it. What I do think is worth it is this team, which consists out of 3 Pokemon that you probably already have built. And if you haven't built them yet, it's definitely worth to make these mons, as all 3 of them have been very useful in limited formats in the past and will continue to be very useful in limited formats in the future. Especially Golbat and Zweilous. They'll be useful on the Halloween Cup as well, which is in a couple weeks already. So overall, this team is a good bang for your buck. It's Golbat, Vigoroth and Zweilous. And if you can, I do believe Shadow Golbat is a little better, just because that extra damage on Poison Fangs and Wing Attacks really helps it win some matchups. But it's not necessary. Regular can work just fine too if you don't have a Shadow. That extra bow can help out sometimes too. This team works since all 3 Pokemon just cover each other incredibly well. I'd say the biggest issue is like an Ice type like Celio or Pidoswine, especially in Elite, since both Golbat and Zweilous definitely don't like to see them. But Zweilous has a lot of play versus both of these, as Dragon Breath is just much more impressive than Powder Snow, so you should definitely be able to play around it. Next up, for a very solid core, we got Dusclops plus Vigoroth, which cover each other extremely well. Dusclops, of course, struggles quite a bit with dark types and normal types, such as Zweilous and Chansey, which Vigoroth just destroys, and Vigoroth can't really deal with fighting types such as Machoke, and poison types such as Nidorina, which Dusclops just walls. Of course, Golbat could be a little bit of an issue for this team, as it doubles his counters from Vigoroth and can Shadow Ball Dusclops. But these are both very playable matchups versus Dusclops. Golbat actually has to bait to win, so if you manage to call a Poison Fang bait or shoot up a Shadow Ball, you can win that straight Ice Punch, and Vigoroth does a lot of damage with Body Slams too. So overall, it is a core breaker which should be quite manageable. In this line, I highly recommend you run Shadow Dusclops. I believe it to be just better in general, mainly because it has a better Vigoroth matchup. Regular Dusclops cannot beat Vigoroth straight Ice Punch, where Shadow can. So that's why I recommend Shadow, Ice Punch, Shadow Punch. If you don't have a Shadow Dusclops, regular would work just fine as well though. To pair with this core, I would highly recommend running Celio in the middle as a good Golbat answer, or with Haunter to make a nice double ghost team. Next team will be based around Alolan Graver, which I think will be quite strong here. It really only has a couple hard counters in ground types such as Marshtomp, and fighting types in Machoke and Hakamo, but all of them I don't think will be that common, and besides them, Graver has like a ton of play versus everything. Even versus Dragons and Vigoroth, which you would think Graver generally loses against, it has a ton of play because Stone Edge just hits him super hard. And besides that, it also walls the poisons, of course, which is pretty huge. Finding a good partner to go with Graver is not easy though, as ideally you'd want that Pokemon to do well against ground types like Marshtomp, Dragons, and Vigoroth. And there's not much that can do that, but the best Pokemon for that is Floette. With Vine Whip, Dazzling Gleam, and Psychic, it does well against all of those. Only problem is that it has to be like extremely Excel, which, well, I don't think I'd really recommend anyone to make a Floette for just this cup, unless you really like Floette. So another option you have is Haunter. Then the team will be quite weak to Marshtomp though, but you know, maybe it's not going to be that common. And Haunter actually still has play versus Marshtomp, so it might still be playable. If you do have a Floette already though, this could be a fun comp. I might actually try it out myself. I don't have a Floette build yet, but I've been meaning to. So you know what? Maybe I'll give this a go. Then in the back with those two, either Floette Graveler or Haunter Graveler, you're gonna run Zweilous or Vigoroth. If you run Zweilous in the back, in this team, you'd want to run Graveler as a pivot, and I do think Graveler is a better pivot than Zweilous. But if you run Vigoroth in the back, you probably want Vigoroth as a pivot. Just try to get shields down and then allow Graveler to sweep. This team does have a couple core breakers. We went over Marshtomp earlier if you run the Haunter lead. If you run a Floette lead, Lairon could be a little issue, especially if you also run Zweilous in the back, since then Floette and Zweilous will get kind of destroyed by Lairon, and Graveler doesn't do great either. But if you run a Vigoroth variant, of course, you have a very good answer to Lairon, and Graveler really isn't that bad either. Vigoroth could also be a little bit of a problem, since Floette, even though you resist counter, will lose to Vigoroth, since you just don't get to your charge moves fast enough. But it's close enough to where you can farm it down with your own Vigoroth or Graveler later, so you can definitely play around it. Finally, an extremely simple team, Double Dragon. Any dragons really work here, but I would recommend you run Dragonair as a pivot and then Hakamo or Zweilous in the back, depending on what you have or what you're leading, which would be an anti-ice, such as Vigoroth, Magmar if you want to be a little spicy, or Magneton. If you're leading Magneton, I wouldn't recommend you bring Zweilous in the back though, since that'd be very weak against Vigoroth. So if you're doing Magneton in the lead, go Hakamo as a second. With the others, you can really go any. If you go Magmar, actually, Zweilous would probably be the play, just because Magmar does struggle quite a bit versus Dusclops. And Zweilous, of course, beats Dusclops, so having that extra coverage, extra dark coverage is nice. With Vigoroth, you could really run any of the two dragons, though actually maybe Zweilous is better to run with Vigoroth, since otherwise you'd be a bit weak to Golbat if you run Vigoroth, Hakamo, of course. So yes, go Magneton. If you have Magneton lead, probably Hakamo in the back. Vigoroth or Magmar in the lead, go Zweilous in the back. The team is very simple. You lead your anti-ice. You don't see an ice, switch your Dragonair, lure it out, take it out with your Dragonair and a bit of your anti-ice, and then your other dragon can hopefully sweep. Spoken a bit about core breakers already. Golbat could be a bit of an issue if you play something like Magmar or Vigoroth in the lead with Hakamo in the back, but if you just go double dragon, it should be fine, though Golbat still does have a lot of play versus you, of course. Vigoroth is basically a core breaker to any team. You just have to play around it, but it should be fine no matter what you run there, as all the dragons are pretty decent against it. Dusclops could also be an issue, as it is so tanky, it can take out most of the anti-ice, and it is Ice Punch to hit your dragons. Thing is though, Dusclops generally hits quite softly, so even the dragons can take care of it, even though Dusclops is hitting them with super effective Ice Punches. So I wouldn't worry too much about those. Anyway, that was it for today. Hope it helped. Let me know what you're gonna run in the Evolution Cup down in the comments below. I'd love to hear it. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.